Thanks everyone for joining in again. I guess just some of the questions that came since our first session that we've had together and the second one. I guess given what we're all dealing with, so really kind of focusing on families and children especially, with the anxiety and pandemic that we're all in. So whilst some of the questions that came in, so I'll just kind of start in a general sense, and whilst not addressing them each individually specific, I guess just probably addressing them generally. So what we'll do is one of the questions that we had, and I'll speak to children specifically. So those are even if you don't have children, this still pertains to you. Because I guess one way of looking at ourselves is also connecting to the child part within us. So, and when I speak of that, I guess there's a lot of us that really are anxious about what's going on in the world at the moment and continuously going on, whilst we're talking about restrictions lifting, or there's still a lot of us that have lost jobs or aren't working or are working from home. And I know one of the questions was, how does one actually manage working from home, keeping boundaries and children? So those that have also got kids that are, doing homeschooling as well as trying to work from home in their own jobs. So I guess the biggest thing really is, and this interlinks with all of the talks that Father Nick has been doing, I guess, is actually really just to kind of show compassion to yourself as well as to your children. And for some people for a lot of people that's actually really hard to do. We are, by nature, we have a lot of standards and there's a lot of pressure for us to be perfect, for us to really achieve and do it well or do it right. And I think what we're noticing at this time is what's called, I guess, in parenting, a good enough parenting. Now, that's not to say that we should drop our guard or we should have excuses, or what good enough parenting means is for us to actually have the quality, not just quantity of time with our children. So as we're locked in together for a large part of the time, so what's it been now, 4 weeks, 5 weeks nearly that we've been in lockdown, 4 weeks almost. See what happens, you lose track of time. So in terms of we're and this is new, we're not used to this. So a lot of people either notice their mood drops, or maybe their children are actually getting a little bit angrier, or their children are getting sadder, so their mood drops as well. There may be behavioural issues. So I guess one of the things is this is a time to drop expectations and not have the focus just on schoolwork. So this is a chance to actually really connect and teach our children what it looks like, or what their emotions are, and help them connect to what their emotions are in their body. So for example, when we're noticing one of our children perhaps being a little bit sad, for us to actually start to label it, instead of glossing over it or trying to distract them or trying to preoccupy them, to actually say, you know what, I can actually see that you're really sad at the moment. I can really see, can you tell me about that? And start to label and teach children what it is that they're feeling. So whether it be in their mind or whether it be in their body. Because sometimes maybe with children, their body might just, as in with adults, your shoulders will drop, maybe your posture will stoop. And for us to start to have a conversation about what's actually going on. And children will say, I don't know, or they'll deflect, or legitimately they actually don't know. So what's important is for us to actually start to develop a language for them as well as for us, and to normalise talking about emotions, to normalise talking about feelings, and for us to also start connecting to our own emotions and our own feelings in an effort to lead by example, yeah? One of the other questions... Okay, mic time. One of the other questions, and I think potentially this obviously it's raising children in faith and trying not to be overzealous, and how do we find a balance? And obviously Father Nick can talk to that as well, or predominantly rather. But I think as in terms of anything, it's everything needs to be balanced. Be mindful of what's actually happening for you, but also too for your children. Now this will vary in terms of your age or the age of the child. And the younger the children, obviously we can just bring them to church or services of what have you. But again, how many services, how long can they stay? The younger the child, the more difficulties to sit quiet, to be attuned. And that's to be expected, that's perfectly normal. As in kindergarten sessions are short, their attention span is short, perfectly normal. As children age, they're able to tolerate more, they're able to engage more, they're able to participate more. But there also comes a time for us, as in other things, it's to say, okay, well, how long, how much when does my child saying, you know what, I actually don't want to do this, or I don't want to go. And for us to starting to respect, to have a conversation and say, well, what actually is going on about that? One of the things is how overzealous. Being zealot is not a good thing. Oh, echoing. Okay, so sorry, we're trialling, we're in and out. We're in and out, we're all trying, and everyone's doing the background. So basically, being overzealous in any act is not great. So I guess really, and again, overriding a child, depending on age, because there's another question that leads into, okay, well, again, you know, what do parents do to help guide their child as they develop older and they get older and they don't want to, or maybe their friends are in a different... maybe their friends aren't Orthodox, or their friends, they go to a liberal university. And again, it's kind of like, to how much, what can parents do? Parents are a role model. The universe rotates around the child. Let me just say that again. The parent is the child's universe, is what I'm trying to say. I'm getting my thoughts confused in my head. I'm visualising it at the same time. The parents are the child's universe. So whether it be as an infant or as an adult or even later, children will always gravitate and get their guidance from the parent or the caregiver, mum, dad, grandparents. So what we need to do is actually guide them and give them examples, and to how far we actually say, you have to do this, you have to eat your dinner, you actually have... So think about it. Children all day long, every day, get told, have you brushed your teeth, have you made your bed, have you had your breakfast, you've got to do this, you've got to get in the car, you've got to get to school. When you get to school, they're being bombarded daily, constantly, of what to think, what to do, how to do it, when to do it, yeah? So what we need to do is actually ask and engage in a conversation and just sit and actually listen to what the child wants within a degree of what is it that they're feeling, what is it that they're thinking, and what is it that they're doing, and that we need to then make decisions, boundaries, yeah, because that's our job as a parent, to have boundaries, that within those boundaries that child can actually operate in. I don't want to, do what you're telling me to do. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's the obedience starting to push back. That's normal, healthy development to a degree. So for us as parents needing to have boundaries of, well, okay, and those boundaries being a little bit fluid, for a reason. For example, bedtime is at a set time. You have your bed, you've got your dinner, you've done your homework if the kids are older, and now it's time for bed. Okay, but if you go out to a party or something, or there's a family gathering, bed is later one night. There's exceptions, yeah. When kids get older, and I'm thinking teenagers more, where it really gets to the point of, well, I'm not going to go with you as a family, or, you can't tell me what to do, you can't tell me what to think, you can't tell me what to say, yeah? Then it's like needing to understand, okay, before it gets to that point, having conversations. Just having conversations and saying, okay, well, what's that about? So what do you mean you don't want to go? Well, what do you mean you want to does the bedtime need extending? Have they gotten old enough that the boundaries and the rules that we had, is it realistic to shift? Then as adults and parents, we need to review that. Or is it something that the child is then resisting, even though the boundaries that we have set for their well-being are right and stable? So there's an interplay. So I suppose for us as parents, so boundaries are really important. If we don't have boundaries and we are porous in our boundaries, and so at the first sign of children pushing them, we drop our boundaries and say, oh, that's okay, children actually find it difficult and start to get challenged, only because it's normal for children to push boundaries, but when those boundaries are tight and rigid, and healthily so, that's really important, they're healthy boundaries, the child will push and they will come back, and then they will push and then they will come back, and there's a flow. If the boundaries are too rigid and too tight, there will be resistance, and then there's unhealthy behaviour, and that needs to be explored. But if our boundaries are too porous and we have no boundaries, that's unhealthy for the child as well. So really needing for us as parents to look at boundaries and say, okay, well, if the behaviour is continuously disobedient, why is that? What is behind it? And it always comes to, is it too restrictive? Is it too tight?
What do you think of this model that I've used for quite a while, telling parents that bringing up, especially kids in their adolescence,
yep,
it's a bit like trying to land a big fish on a thin line.
You do. No, that's a great analogy. You do have to. It's compromise.
Because a lot of people think that they can pull so hard and the line is unbreakable, but it is breakable.
It's very breakable.
That's the tragedy.
It's very breakable, and unless it's breakable, but it's also fixable. Mm-hmm. But we need to be aware of when it breaks. And when we're aware of when it breaks, and this is daily, okay, we're not talking about just big breaks. Even, we call them ruptures, even little breaks. When we're aware of even the little breaks, we need to be in a position to be able to identify it and to repair it. And as long as we can repair, or we're willing to repair, sometimes we can't totally repair it, but in our effort to repair, the child will see that we're making the effort, okay? So maybe the child won't forgive us as parents completely initially because they're wounded, okay? But if they actually see us trying to repair and then us giving them space to sit with the repair, and then for us to go in and out, again, there's that flow. And I brought a little device that I use with my clients all the time. And I use it all the time as an example of flow. Flow, from a psychological perspective, is really important for us somatically, for us mentally, and for us emotionally. Now, not just as adults, but also with children, and also in parenting, but also too in relationships. It's really important, and we don't want to be stuck. Now, again, if you can imagine going back to the first talk that we had, we talked about us being, at the end of the day, a nervous system, in a body. So children are no different. And so when they too are disobedient, say for example, or there's been a rupture and their nervous system is feeling threatened. So it's like, okay, well, I can't do what I want to do. So I'm either angry or I'm upset. So angry being that fight and flight response, or upset and sad being that freeze response. So they're getting the physiological signs as well as the emotional signs. So this isn't all just in their head. When children are upset, it's in their body as well. Okay? So for us to imagine visually, as I touched base on it in the first example, in the first session, was, hopefully you can all see that, it's called a Hoberman sphere, but that's beside the point. So if you think of our nervous system, and children as well, okay, what we want is a flow. This isn't connected to breathing, it's just our nervous system. So throughout the day, there's just a flow, yeah? And so sometimes we're going to be a little bit higher, and sometimes we're going to be a little bit lower. Perfectly okay. Okay, but sometimes, even children or adults, what happens is we're really activated, and that's us. That's our nervous system at maximum, I was going to say capacity, but just maximum. Like, even you can see how, from a physiological perspective, this is where the straw breaks the camel's back. You really can't take much more, yeah? Whereas if you're in flow and something happens, you can deal with it and then you come back and deal with it and come back. But people get stuck, as do children. They get stuck at fight, flight, or they get stuck in freeze, which is just too low. Yeah? And again, that's not where we want to be. So what we're needing to do is identify, okay, and label and normalise and connect, even as parents. So, well, you know what, when I actually say no to my child and I see them just withdraw, okay, they've contracted. You know, they physically contract, maybe they've emotionally contracted, or maybe they've just gone really angry and they've had the mother of all tantrums. Yeah, they're fight, flight. And you can see how difficult is it to contain a child at that point. They are full on, as opposed to somewhere where you can actually teach, you can talk, you can maybe discuss things, depending on the child's age. But that's a little example of where they too struggle. So for us to keep that in mind, for our bodies, our emotions, our physiology, but there's two. They're just littler versions of us. They too feel what we feel, but for us to teach them how to manage that activation and how to manage that contraction, so we can give them the tools instead of them just being stuck in it. I was waiting for another question from you,
Yes? I have one question addressed to me, but I think I'll leave it for now because the camera is actually aimed at yourself.
Yep.
I will handle that later.
Okay.
But I was going to, if I could expand on the question that I asked originally.
Yep.
You see, what I had in mind was the description of the actual force that creates a relationship, that line.
Or that attachment.
That attachment.
Yeah.
Okay? So obedience is that. Okay? When it's broken, well, that's, extreme, like, that's break in obedience.
Well, rupture. We'd call it a rupture. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? So, what are the forces that go into creating that invisible line?
Oh, the forces.
Forces. I mean, in theology, we have plenty to say about that.
Yeah.
Yes.
From an attachment perspective, attachment is, from a psychological and secular perspective, we'd be calling it attachment, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And attachment underpins all of our well-being, really. Mm-hmm. So if we don't have a secure attachment, and really from a psychological perspective, one would argue that there aren't that many, not that it's not possible, but those that present with issues later on in life tend to come from a place of not having a secure attachment. Mm-hmm. So secure being able to have your needs met emotionally, physically, and all the rest of it, but also too, which on the face of it sounds easy enough, but when we understand, when people come into therapy, say for example, people's perception of what they were missing in childhood, because that's where attachment is made or broken, yeah. But it really, if that is broken, it's very difficult for then people to actually then. There's a lot of psychological issues that come from unstable or broken attachment. Mm-hmm. The forces could be many. Could be, again, poverty, mental illness for the parents. Is that what you're alluding to, those sort of difficulties?
We think in Christianity of obedience as a form of love. Okay? So, for instance, the contemplation of the great icon of the Holy Trinity, where the Father gives the obedience to the Son to accept the cup. I spoke today about the cup of Gethsemane. That's the ultimate one.
Yeah.
But I remember how decades ago Metropolitan Vitali was speaking to a group of young people in Dandenong, and he said, you young people, you're going to grow up and you'll have children, you'll become family people, and you will need to understand what obedience is. And that obedience has to do with one's own obedience to God.
Yeah.
Love of God translate. He said, if you're obedient, all obedience starts with God. Yeah. If you're obedient to Him, then your children will be obedient to you. Right? He said it's a vertical flow. Yeah. It's a vertical flow. But that's theology / anthropology. That's
theology. I guess it's in terms of, because I think one of the other questions that we touched on, how do you teach your child to to follow the or what can parents actually do? What's the biggest influence or factor that parents can actually have to influence their child to follow the path? And I think us as role models, it's, whilst we may be passionate, whilst we may really believe wholeheartedly, whilst we may be zealous because there's a sense of meaning in our lives from our faith, there's a very delicate line of actually, that's our free will choosing to a large part. There comes a time when the child / teenager / young adult, like in anything in life, needs to make their own choices. And does it come against the potential family of origin? It may do. We can only, as adults, teach what it is that we believe in, teach what it is that we would like our children to believe in, so the values that are important to us and to the family unit, and to be consistent in those. So there's no point in teaching how to be religious and observe all the bits that we need to observe, yet we speak harshly to our children, or we speak harshly from father to mother. There's no point in teaching the religious aspects if at home what children see is behaviour that doesn't follow the values of what I suppose your faith says it is. So children are very good at actually picking up dissonance. Children are very good at actually picking up what doesn't fit and make sense. So if we're talking about actually saying, oh, we've got to go to church on Sunday because it's the right thing to do, but dad's been really abusive to or mum's been really abusive, and there's children go, well, hang on, there starts to be an incongruence. So for us as role models to, as much as possible, live by the values that we want to teach, which is not a simple thing for us as adults to do as well, then for the children to actually hopefully follow in our footsteps.
I've got a quick, if we've got time for one more. I've got a question about the dynamics between parents. So we've been kind of talking about the dynamics between parents and children.
Yep.
But I think also the dynamics between parents is changing now.
Yeah.
Quite often, each parent might have they might share the same values, but their kind of parenting maybe
styles are different.
Or, strengths are kind of in different places.
Yep.
And up to now, two parents being together with the children didn't happen very often.
Yeah.
Maybe in the morning, maybe in the evening, maybe half a day on the weekend or something.
Yeah.
But and now you've got both parents at home in some cases, in a lot of cases, with the kids, and you've got like these kind of two parenting styles, and kids are fairly savvy and
very
playing the odds.
Yes.
What kind of communication between parents?
Yeah.
What kind of maybe advice or situations?
I think, and it's very common, and I think sometimes you can actually, people notice that on the weekends perhaps as well. So if there's a primary caregiver during the week, there's a routine, there's a structure, and things flow relatively well. And then the other caregiver comes home and there's a disruption. So whether, one of the caregivers has had them and it's just been, okay, hang on a sec, you have the kids as the partner comes through the door. It's really important for parents to be on the same page and not to do that in front of the children. It's really important for parents to be on the same page consistently, even if you don't agree with the decisions that your husband or wife has made, and to not disagree with your husband or wife in front of the children. So if you disagree with their parenting style or the advice, and it's just, oh, honey, can I actually just talk to you for a second out of earshot and explain, hang on, I really don't like or disagree or what have you, because children see a crack and they'll go in and divide and conquer. And then it's just, it's on for young and old. So needing the consensus, because what you don't want is them to not see a united front. So really important, and I'm not a family therapist, but the first thing would be to really be consistent and have a consistent message. And to know that before...
That's where the boundaries...
It's very much a boundary.
Common boundaries that you
Yep.
both agree on.
Both agree on it. It's something it's very important to do before you have children. And if you have them already, this is something potentially to say, look, we really need to discuss this. Because I'm finding your parenting styles difficult to deal with, or I'm getting maybe they're getting triggered with your parenting style that you're bringing, and vice versa. So we've all been brought up differently, and we've come together as a husband and wife to then create our own family. And we have I have my ideas of creating a family, and my husband would have his ideas of creating a family. And sometimes we might, even though we have a similar goal and a similar trajectory, how we get there mightn't be the same way. So there's an overriding commonality, but needing to decide what it is and how you do it together before, and not fight in front of the children, and make sure you're not within earshot, because children can also, depending on age, have a unique ability of standing by the door, and especially when they know you're both in the bedroom and they just creep up. So being smart about it, because they're on top of it, they're extremely switched on, so we need to be more switched on than they are. It's a never-ending game. It's just, you've just got to keep on fighting the good fight, is all it is. It's a battle. It's exhausting. It's never-ending, and it really is a calling. But now that you have them, you have the responsibility to do it. I'm not going to, but also to realise and be forgiving and compassionate on yourself, so that you too can show forgiveness and model forgiveness and compassion to them, so they too can learn it for themselves and then for others. Because I think one of the biggest things that I see in clients is that inner critic that we take as a child, and we just absorb those negative messages, whether we heard them or not. We may have seen them or implied. We take those negative messages and they just become part of our inner being, and it's really trying to stop those negative messages settling in the young mind and body, and trying to teach and have positive ones there instead.
All right. Thank you, Helen.
There's one question here that I think it's kind of it comes up often, I think, and it's one that should be reinforced and restated by you. So the question here is, you have a small child or children, and they ask you the classic question of, why does God allow this to happen? Whatever it is, death, pandemic, my dog dying, grandma passing away, and why does he? What's the good, easy, succinct answer to give to small children?
Look, many of these questions, you can't just brush them off. Because the answer might sound like banal, and dismissive. You can't do that. That's the first thing, You got to treat it seriously, even if it's a small child asking the question. Yeah. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I think that children are much more intelligent than we think, right? And they're capable of understanding very deep things, maybe better than adults, in some sense. So I think it's important to communicate to them the idea that, from Christian anthropology, that there are different levels of human life. It's all part of the one humanity that we have. We talk about the body, the soul, and the spirit. Okay? So, but there's a hierarchy there. The spirit is the most important part of our life, because spiritual life is eternal. Bodily life is temporary. Therefore, God organizes things in such a way that He wants to benefit the spirit, because the spirit is going to live on forever. And the body, with Christianity, of course, we believe also in the resurrection of the body eventually, right? So that's having a body like Christ's body after His resurrection. However, that's a spiritual body anyway. And in that body, we won't have the disharmony that we have in this body, because this body is like, instead of being the horse, it's become the rider, and the spirit has become, the rider has become burdened with the horse, okay, because of the dominance of earthly, material, physical, bodily concerns. Look how much time we spend on our bodily needs, right? And how much time human beings spend on their spiritual needs, right? But when that is explained to kids and they understand that, there is a part of us, the spiritual part, the highest part, is the most valuable part. And that for the sake of that life, you need to make sacrifices. And sometimes, that saying, it sounds like a, pretty trite and banal saying, no pain, no gain. But it's a very Christian saying. It is. Because, look, I've been talking about the cross. What is the cross? No pain, no gain. That's our cross. Okay? That's our transformation. So we can't have it both ways. You can't...
Just the good stuff.
It's about the cake and eating it too, You can't have it both ways. Yeah. So to achieve spiritual goals, God allows things that are really very often caused by human beings. And this pandemic, did God cause it? No, He didn't. Human beings caused this pandemic, and they're still causing it. Okay? So why blame God for it? Otherwise, God would need to interfere, barge in and say, okay, you can't do it this way, you've got to do it my way. And where's our freedom going to be? Because God wants us to be free beings, loving, free beings. Okay? That's impossible unless He steps aside. He's got to step back and give us space. Otherwise, He'll be the biggest helicopter in the universe. And we don't want that. He doesn't want it. He doesn't want it that way. You see? So, stop blaming God. We have to look at ourselves. And we have to understand that there's a hierarchy of, even in psychology, Maslow talks about hierarchy of needs. But in actual fact, the spiritual needs in Christian vocabulary are the highest needs. Not after you've satisfied all your bodily needs that, now I've got 5 minutes for God. Okay? That's not on. That's not going to give you a life of the Spirit. All right? So kids can understand more than we think. And we need to understand this so that we can explain it in the language that our own kids can understand. We understand it, we see it clearly, we'll be able to explain it to kids. I think the problem is not with kids, it's with the parents.
Is that a time too, perhaps, for the parents to introduce that death is part of life in this time?
Yeah, well, of course death is part of life. And I mean, kids, you as a psychologist would know a lot about when kids become aware of the fact that there is life, there is death, sorry. Okay? What age? At what age?
I think probably primary school, not even primary school.
Preschoolers. About the age of 5, I thought.
Yeah.
About the age of 5?
Yeah.
Okay, so look, you can't, it's like the story of Buddha, whose father was trying to just cushion him, protect him from all the, it doesn't work, It's the worst thing you can do for your child, to protect them so much that they don't live in a real world.
It causes anxiety. It causes anxiety.
Yeah. When they hit the, they get a dose of reality. That's going to cause an anxiety. So you need to introduce them to a bit of a reality.